Diabetes is a word that everyone in the world has heard. Everyone knows at least one person who has something like, they have diabetes, it seems. Or something along the lines of, my grandmother used to inject insulin, or even worse. There was a girl in kindergarten who got diabetes, probably from eating too many sweets. Everyone has heard about diabetes, but as usual, until it affects you personally, you don't really think about what it actually is. In the meantime, since 2006, the World Health Organization and the International Diabetes Federation have actively used the term 21st century pandemic in relation to diabetes, to emphasize its rapid spread and serious consequences for public health. According to official data, in 2024, there are over 850 million people worldwide suffering from some form of diabetes. By 2030, the number of cases will surpass 1 billion. More people die from complications caused by diabetes each year than from cancer, AIDS, and heart diseases combined. So what exactly is diabetes? My name is Oleg Pogozhev, and in this film we will try to understand on the causes and consequences of diabetes spreading across the planet, its impact on society and the economy, and about whether humanity has the knowledge and technology to stop this disease.
This is Vasilisa. 3 years ago, at the age of 7, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Doctors say that Vasilisa is lucky, if such a word can even be applied to a situation where a child is diagnosed with an incurable disease. She was fortunate because her illness was detected early, at an initial stage, before any life-threatening complications began. Vasilisa was diagnosed with diabetes by chance when she had a blood test before starting sports training. The test showed an excessively high sugar level, further investigations were conducted, and the diagnosis became clear. This gave the family time to prepare, to understand what was happening, and to prevent a sudden deterioration of the condition. But more often it's the other way around. About 80% of children worldwide learn about their diagnosis not in a doctor's office but in the intensive care unit. Parents notice that the child has suddenly lost weight, become lethargic, drinks a lot, and urinates frequently. However, these symptoms are usually attributed to the heat, growth, or fatigue. Then, a sudden deterioration, coma, acute decompensation, and the fear in the eyes of parents who knew nothing about diabetes just yesterday but today stand by their child's bedside, connected to IV drips, trying to comprehend that all of this is happening to them. Some children are admitted to the hospital in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis. This is a severe condition where the body, unable to obtain energy from glucose, begins to break down its own tissues. Fats. Acetone appears in the blood, consciousness is impaired, blood pressure drops, and organs fail. Without urgent medical assistance, death. In this sense, Vasilisa was indeed fortunate. Fortunate that the diagnosis wasn't a shock. Fortunate that her body hadn't started to deteriorate from within. It was fortunate that from the very beginning there were doctors nearby who explained everything, and parents who were able to take control of the situation. But even with such a gentle introduction to the diagnosis, diabetes remains a tough challenge. Like many children, Vasilisa does not yet understand the additional challenge she will have to tackle 24/7 for the rest of her life. For now, her parents help her with everything.
I think all parents, or at least most of them, hope and believe in a bright future.
Well, I just don't really know, but I will live peacefully, start to manage it better, help my parents with diabetes, and I'll keep hoping that somehow it will disappear one day. We all hope for this, and so it will be. Both grandmothers and grandfathers, indeed our entire family, hope for this, myself included.
Outwardly, a child with diabetes is no different from other children. Only the most observant can notice the small sensor on the arm. This is a continuous glucose monitoring system, CGM. A few years ago, such sensors seemed like science fiction, and decades ago, they didn't exist in the public domain at all. When scientists first began studying diabetes in the early 20th century, they didn't even know how to accurately measure glucose levels in the blood. They assessed risk based on indirect signs through urine. The first home-use glucometer appeared in the 1970s and was the size of a brick. To check the sugar level, you had to prick your finger, squeeze out a drop of blood, and apply it to a special test strip. After a minute, the result appeared on the screen. This was progress. But such a method required immense discipline, especially from the parents of young children with diabetes. Imagine an infant who is not even a year old. A baby, just beginning to smile, eat puree, or utter their first syllables. And suddenly the diagnosis, type 1 diabetes. For the parents, it's a blow. From this day on, not only are the nights sleepless, but there's also the need to prick the tiny fingers of the baby several times a day. Every prick is a stress for both the child and the adult, but there is no choice. It's necessary to know the sugar level to prevent the child from slipping into a coma. Some parents compare the first weeks after the diagnosis to wartime. The alarm mode is on 24/7. You're afraid you won't hear the glucometer's signal, afraid you'll oversleep, afraid to just leave the child alone in the room. You stop living, you monitor, control, count, analyze. And you quickly realize that the most frightening thing is evil, not high sugar but a sharp drop in glucose levels, hypoglycemia. CGM sensors have become a real revolution. They operate around the clock, reading sugar levels every 5 minutes. Parents can now sleep soundly. The phone will alert them if the sugar level is too low. However, these devices are not perfect either. They measure sugar not in the blood itself, but in the interstitial fluid, so the signal of a sharp drop or rise may be delayed. When every minute counts, it's critical. That's why glucometers are still necessary to quickly and accurately check when life depends on a number. Sensors need to be replaced every 10-14 days. They are expensive and not available everywhere. Not every child is immediately ready to befriend them, especially the younger ones, who find it hard to understand why this patch with a needle is necessary. But over time, they get used to it. Parents learn to let go of control and breathe a little easier. Today, technology is advancing rapidly. Implantable sensors are already emerging, which can be installed for up to 6 months in advance. Scientists are working on developing non-invasive methods without punctures or blood. And most importantly, the dream of millions of parents and patients is an artificial pancreas, where the sensor and insulin pump work together automatically, without human intervention. For now, it's a struggle. Daily, constant. Yet with each passing year, it becomes a little less lonely and a bit more manageable. If Vasilisa accidentally miscalculates and makes an extra jab, she won't check her blood sugar. One can die. If you don't drink juice or eat sugar in time. If you don't take an insulin shot after eating, it leads to high blood sugar. Although it is not noticeable to the patient or those around them, the blood vessels are being damaged. Vasilisa is currently on low doses of insulin and uses insulin pens. These are special insulin syringes, as she doesn't want to use a pump yet, and her parents think it might interfere with her professional sports training. Coach Vasilisa is aware of the illness, but like any person without diabetes, she cannot always understand the condition of the tennis player.
The issue of diabetes itself is a significant psychosocial medical problem. In other words, it touches upon various aspects of human life, the state, and society. Firstly, it is a serious medical issue. Secondly, this medical issue significantly impacts a person's life as a whole. Therefore, it is such a significant social issue. Additionally, the government spends enormous amounts of money on it, and the incidence of diabetes is increasing. Therefore, it is a major governmental program and issue to which the state pays a lot of attention. Well, therefore, this problem in itself is medical, social, and socio-psychological. Type 1 diabetes is a condition, a disease that has a genetic basis, or to be more precise, epigenetic predisposition, which is then realized through environmental factors. In other words, to put it more simply, a person has inherent settings or a certain predisposition, meaning there is a risk of developing a particular disease, in this case type 1 diabetes, and under unfavorable external circumstances, this predisposition manifests into the expression of this primary diagnosis. For type 1 diabetes to manifest, as a rule, It requires either some very intense external influence, apparently instantaneous, or not very intense but prolonged. Such influences include, firstly, viral infections, that is, certain viruses. It could be some kind of prolonged infection that depletes the immune system, drains resources, and exhausts the body's reserves. Ultimately, this could lead to diabetes. It could be acute or chronic stress. Acute stress occurs when a person is frightened by something and is unable to cope with the fear, which depletes their resources sharply and triggers a diagnosis. This could be chronic stress. Let's say a child lives in an environment where they go to kindergarten every day and hate their teacher. So he walks and walks every day, and eventually this gradually wears down and depletes his resource capabilities, his reserve capabilities, and ultimately diabetes manifests. It could be any external excessive impact that the body no longer has the strength to resist. This could be a heat stroke or a cold shock. It could be some kind of poisoning. It might be prolonged chemical poisoning. In other words, these are generally any external influences that deplete the body's reserve capabilities and lead to a homeostasis imbalance, that is, the stability of the internal environment. These are external environmental factors that disrupt the balance of the internal environment, manifesting as type 1 diabetes, because there is an inherent epigenetic predisposition.
Diabetes is not a single disease, but a whole group of disorders that at first glance seem completely different. One develops rapidly in a child, while the other stealthily creeps up on an adult, living, for example, under stress and lack of sleep. However, they share a common core: hyperglycemia, which means elevated levels of glucose, or, as it's commonly referred to, sugar in the blood. Hyperglycemia is the main silent enemy in all types of diabetes. Unlike hypoglycemia, which is a sudden drop in sugar levels where a person may lose consciousness and feel extreme weakness, hyperglycemia develops slowly but insidiously. You can live, work, and socialize for years with high blood sugar without realizing that your body is destroying itself all this time. The most vulnerable, tiniest blood vessels are the first to suffer. These are the capillaries in the retina of the eye, in the kidneys, in the legs, and in the brain. Hence, blindness, kidney failure, strokes, amputations. This is precisely why doctors insist on regular checkups even in the absence of symptoms. And if in type 1 diabetes hyperglycemia occurs because the body completely stops producing insulin, then in type 2 diabetes the problem is often different. It's as if insulin is present, but the cells lose their sensitivity to it. This is called insulin resistance. And it can build up over the years while a person lives on the edge, unaware of what's happening. The transition from the first type to the second in our film is not just a change of characters and stories, it's a logical continuation. Because despite the different mechanisms, the essence of the diseases is the same: blood sugar gets out of control. Only in the first case is it instant and permanent, while in the second, it is gradual and can be controlled if action is taken in time. Type 2 diabetes is often referred to as a lifestyle disease. Its development is closely linked to diet, stress, physical activity levels, genetics, and sleep. This is a disease that a person sometimes brings upon themselves, unaware of how daily choices affect their metabolism. But regardless of the type, hyperglycemia remains the core of the problem. Everything we will discuss next is, in one way or another, related to the attempt to control this sugar. A figure that daily determines the well-being, health, and even the lives of millions of people.
My name is Evgeny. I am an entrepreneur and investor living in Argentina, and for many years I have been engaged in self-development, followed by project development, including both social and commercial ones. Studied in London back in the day, lived in various countries, you could say an international entrepreneur. Quite unexpectedly for me, this story happened. I was doing a checkup at my wife's request. I used to think that I was living a healthy lifestyle. It was a surprise for me when I was diagnosed in January 2023 that I have type 2 diabetes, and at that time my HbA1c was 7.7. This is definitely a diabetic condition. I had it even before the diagnosis was made. Life changed dramatically because I received a consultation from an endocrinologist. She consistently told me that it was necessary to follow a diet and engage in physical exercise. I was already on a diet. I had stopped eating sweets by then and was watching what I ate. Sometimes I even weighed what I ate, and it seemed to me then that I was already living a fairly healthy lifestyle. It was like a bolt from the blue, because all my life I thought, since my mom is a doctor, that diabetes is an incurable and progressive disease, so I never wanted it. No, I knew that it could develop, although no one in our family had it. So I was conscious about my dietary choices. I didn't eat certain foods or limited myself and thought that was enough to proactively address the issue and avoid developing diabetes. It turned out that no, it was clearly not enough. And moreover, I know that now, through the acknowledgement of what is happening now, that steps were taken towards health, not just a few, but very few. Yes, I feel it. My wife and I had an episode that I remember very well. We went to eat at a cafe. I ate, didn't eat anything forbidden there, but still couldn't get up from the table. My spouse says, check your sugar level, so I checked it, and my sugar level was 23.4. On the little monitor, I can't get up from the table. I've been in a cold sweat for 40 minutes. Then, like a 100-year-old man, we went arm in arm home, where I slept for 4 hours. I realized that this, of course, is disappointment, complete helplessness, a feeling of serious despair, as if everything is now a one-way street. Meanwhile, my wife is already pregnant. We're expecting a child. It's my second marriage, and we're waiting for the baby. And at this moment, I realize that my battery, the battery charge, is at 7% out of 100 possible. One of the doctors and I reached a consensus that it can be reversed. This disease can be reversed, and international practice supports this. It turns out that during the training, this also came up, that in 2018 there is an international consensus among doctors and diabetologists that type 2 diabetes is a reversible disease and it can be put into remission. And this became the goal of my future life, I would even say, because ultimately it was important for me to resolve this process in a positive way at any cost.
Diabetes is the most common chronic disease in the world. More than 800 million adults, which is 14% of all people over the age of 18, live with some form of diabetes. And now, this is twice as many as it was in 1990. About 252 million adults with diabetes are unaware of their condition, which increases the risk of serious complications and premature death. In 1924, diabetes was the cause of 3.5 million deaths, equivalent to 1 death every 6 seconds. Global healthcare expenditures related to diabetes. exceeded $1 trillion in 1924, increasing by 338% over the past 17 years. And the problem continues to grow. In 20 years, there will be over 1 billion people battling diabetes. When we hear the word diabetes, we often think it's a disease of our time, sugar, fast food, and inactivity. However, in reality, diabetes is not a new companion of humanity. The first descriptions of its symptoms are found in ancient Egyptian papyri. Thousands of years ago, doctors in India and China spoke of diseases in which a person loses weight rapidly and develops sweet urine, which was even tasted. While diabetes used to be rare, today it is a widespread phenomenon. Why? Because over the last 100 years, our lifestyle has changed dramatically. We move less, eat more, and are more often under stress. We consume processed foods rich in sugar, fat, and salt. We rarely get sunlight, sleep poorly, and live in a constant state of urgency. This is not a conspiracy, it's just the convenient yet dangerous rhythm of modern life. Particularly dangerous for people with a genetic predisposition. Type 2 diabetes is not just about food, it's about a combination of factors: age, hormones, inflammation, and genes. Even with a normal diet, if your mother or grandmother had diabetes, your risk is higher. This is why even children and teenagers are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, not because of sweets, but because genetics combined with an unhealthy lifestyle. And what about type 1 diabetes? Where does it come from if it's not about obesity and laziness? Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the immune system, for unknown reasons, attacks the beta cells of the pancreas that produce insulin. These cells are destroyed, and the body permanently loses the ability to regulate blood sugar. Why does the immune system go haywire? The main hypothesis is a combination of genetics and an external trigger, a virus, stress, or the environment. Scientists identified genes associated with type 1 diabetes, such as HLA-DR3 and HLA-DR4, but even carriers of these genes can be healthy. This means it's not a sentence, but a risk. Today, geneticists are discovering more and more markers associated with diabetes. This gives hope. Knowing the risks allows for early monitoring and intervention. There are already programs where children at high risk are tested from birth, monitored for antibodies, early signs of issues, and action is taken at the slightest indication. The earlier the monitoring begins, the higher the chance to slow down or even stop the progression of diabetes. For now, genes are beyond our control, but understanding the hidden mechanisms is the key to a future where diabetes will no longer be a surprise.
If we are talking about type 1 diabetes being genetically or epigenetically predetermined, then environmental factors are of fundamental importance, because a person may have a predisposition but can live their life in such a way that this predisposition never manifests. In essence, he may carry certain genetic mutations or changes, but live his life in such a way that they never manifest themselves. In this sense, diabetes manifests as a diagnosis only under unfavorable external circumstances. Therefore, of course, external environmental factors are of fundamental importance as they manifest this diagnosis. In a person as an actual disease,
Type 1 diabetes is classified as polygenic or multifactorial diseases. This means that there is no direct inheritance of the disease as such. Only the predisposition is inherited, and even then to varying degrees. There are a number of diseases that inheritance is absolute. As a rule, all these diseases are caused by a defect in one, or at most two genes. Therefore, they are called monogenic diseases. If this genetic mutation is dominant, inheritance in 100% of cases is recessive, 25–50%. The situation is completely different with type 1 diabetes. It is an autoimmune disease, and
around 80 different factors contribute to the predisposition to it. Genes. Among them, the most significant role is played by the genes of the major histocompatibility complex, HLA. They determine about 40–50% of the predisposition to type 1 diabetes. In conclusion to this question, once again I say that this is not a hereditary disease, but it is a disease with a strong hereditary predisposition. As of today, it is known there are approximately 80 genes that are somehow associated with the development of type 1 diabetes. However, the situation with type 2 diabetes is much worse. For it, around 550 different genes are already known. They are being discovered literally every month, more and more. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to analyze which factors are genetically primary and which are secondary in the development of type 2 diabetes. There are some common genes that play a role in the predisposition to both types of diabetes, but in principle, these genes are completely different. After all, type 1 diabetes is primarily caused by the characteristics of the immune system's genes. It is precisely due to these unfavorable traits that an autoimmune reaction against beta cells begins, leading to the onset of type 1 diabetes. The main causes of type 2 diabetes development are disruptions in insulin signal transmission. There is plenty of insulin, and it is initially produced normally, but its signal transmission is impaired. In other words, completely different genes are at work, not the ones expressed in type 1 diabetes. If a person has a genetic predisposition to an autoimmune reaction against beta cells, the likelihood of such a reaction occurring in such a person will be approximately 30 times higher than in a person who does not have the predisposing genes. But it is very often the case that an autoimmune reaction against beta cells occurs even without any particular genetic predisposition. This, for example, occurs after certain viral infections, such as after enteroviral infections with Coxsackie group viruses. There, the initial cause of beta cell damage is the viral infection itself. The virus simply enters the beta cell and destroys it. And as a result, type 1 diabetes begins with a very acute and severe onset. And then, due to the fact that fragments of destroyed beta cells, individual molecules, parts, spill into the bloodstream, the immune system reacts to them, and an autoimmune response joins the initial viral destruction of the beta cells. Therefore, the process continues further, meaning the beta cells do not recover even if the virus leaves them. What is the most remarkable thing to note? Around the year 2018, a system for genetic risk assessment was developed. This was accomplished by a large international group of scientists, including researchers from Europe and the USA. In English, this is called a genetic risk score, a genetic calculation of the risk of type 1 diabetes. This system was precisely based on the study of those very 80 genes I mentioned at the very beginning. How was all this done? They took about 5,000 people, 5,000 patients with type 1 diabetes, and examined how these 80 genes differ from the same genes in people without type 1 diabetes. Based on special tables were constructed for this calculation system, and even now there are such tables. Online calculators, but they are intended, of course, not for the public, not for people who have some knowledge in this field. You input specific data about a patient into this calculator, or rather not yet a patient, but about a person from a risk group, and the calculator automatically calculates what is the probability of developing type 1 diabetes over the next 5, 10, or 20 years. This is a tremendous achievement. Why? Because relatively recently, namely at the end of in 1923, the first immunotherapeutic agent appeared that truly allows for the halting of the progression of type 1 diabetes, but only during the so-called preclinical period, when a person still has a very, very large reserve of beta cells. When diabetes has begun, this drug, which is called teplizumab, it no longer works. But similar means similar immunoprophylactic. Immunotherapeutic drugs are actively being developed, both by purely scientific laboratories and by powerful pharmaceutical companies. And therefore, this risk assessment becomes extremely important. That is, the understanding of whether a person is in the preclinical stage of diabetes or does not have it. If he is in the preclinical stage, then these new effective preventive measures apply to him, even preventive ones, not treatment. The remarkable work of Finnish researchers, you know, the Finns have a special relationship with diabetes. They have the highest incidence rate in Finland and worldwide. They have plenty of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So the Finns demonstrated a remarkable. They have proven that even people with a very strong genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes, the simplest measures, such as proper nutrition and physical activity, can significantly reduce the risk of developing clinical type 2 diabetes by almost half. This is precisely the answer to your question, meaning it is possible to fight. In any case, regarding type 2 diabetes with a genetic predisposition, simply by maintaining a proper lifestyle.
So, what is humanity ready to counter the spread of diabetes with today? A tremendous force, the power of science, the power of technology, and perhaps the most important force of all, the human spirit. Over the past 100 years, humanity has transitioned from a death sentence to living with a diagnosis in its relationship with diabetes. In 1921, Canadian Dr. Frederick Banting, along with Charles Best, isolated insulin for the first time. Before this, children with type 1 diabetes died within a few months, slowly and painfully. They were literally treated with starvation. Insulin became a miracle, a gift, and at the same time the beginning of a new era, the era of fighting diabetes. Today, we not only manually inject insulin, but we can also connect devices to the body that successfully monitor sugar levels and automatically adjust medication delivery. We can manage diabetes through a phone app, receive advice from a virtual doctor, and view real-time data from anywhere in the world. Technology has made a huge leap forward. There are insulin pumps that precisely dose the medication and sensors that alert you to a drop in sugar levels before it becomes dangerous. The first artificial damaged glands have also appeared, systems that combine a sensor and a pump into one closed system. Devices that can be implanted under the skin for a month and beyond are already being tested.
a lot of, well, such fundamentally unresolved issues, meaning that as of today, we don't know how realistic it is to create insulin that would work for only 30, 40 minutes. It might be realistic or it might not be. It may succeed or it may not, we don't know. If we manage to create such a fast-acting insulin, we're halfway there to full automation. How much can the accuracy of monitoring be increased? If at least this much is added to the current level, it's still only halfway there. With these monitoring parameters and the current insulin operation, using today's algorithms and a modern smartphone, it will be entirely possible to perfectly manage blood glucose levels. Even if a person doesn't tell the pump at all about how much they've eaten. It will somehow be possible to transmit information about what was eaten to the pump. I don't know, maybe humanity will develop telepathy, but somehow. That's only halfway, meaning we've already rushed ahead on this path. We just don't know when. But overall, of course, there will certainly be a moment when there will be a box, a device. And you will just need to take it out and attach it somewhere on yourself. And you won't have to think about diabetes. And both the doctor and the person with diabetes can be confident that from this moment on, the glucose level is correct, normal, and I have the battery. There might be a number of concepts suggesting that this device should be attached not on the outside, but somewhere inside. Well, sewn in, so to speak. By the way, implanted pumps do exist. Currently, they don't install them. These are technologies from the early 2000s. At that time, several thousand people received implanted pumps. It just turned out as the story progressed that not everything was as wonderful, and there were more drawbacks than advantages. But people who carry pumps within themselves are still alive. There are not just 5 of them, there are more. And they are not heading in that direction. Well, again, from accumulated, probably somewhat negative experience, but also because we are not sure today that we are already ready to integrate it and be confident that everything will be fine. But maybe this hypothetical device will need to be not on ourselves, but carry within oneself, occasionally recharging somehow. Maybe faster to cope with reprogramming the immune system. Because, well, now this is already a well-known fact. In general, the human body attempts to heal itself from type 1 diabetes, at least to some extent. And throughout their lives, people regenerate the cells that are supposed to produce insulin. The problem essentially is that the immune system remembers that they need to be destroyed. And we still don't know how to change or erase this memory. This is also a task for some future, not the technogenic one we think of with an insulin pump, but about genome editing. Immunology, molecular genetics, that's where it's headed. As of today, well, insulin pump therapy is probably the most expensive aspect of diabetes treatment, aside from hemodialysis, when the complications are already very advanced. More expensive than insulin pump therapy is only hemodialysis. Therefore, yes, and people usually cannot bear such a financial burden. Again, it's about having to bear it for a lifetime. And the state to provide this for everyone is not ready yet either. Now it's better than it was. Each year is slightly better than the last. That is, every year more money is allocated, more pumps, more pump users. But today, not everyone who could and would like to has the opportunity. Use the pump at the state's expense. So this is also some kind of barrier, right? But perhaps the third one is better now. And it gets better every year. But the third barrier is probably not so obvious. There aren't many doctors who are willing to support patients on pumps with a deep understanding of how the pump can be set up, adjusted, and managed. pumps are not taught in residency. Let's just say not every residency program teaches you how to handle a pump. Some. Well, it's like, cardiac surgery, right? I mean, they teach surgery in residency, but cardiac surgery is a separate specialization, like ophthalmology, right? It's a very narrow field that requires additional training. We don't have many endocrinologists. There are regions where doctors and patients are separated by dozens of kilometers. Yes, and this accessibility of professional medical assistance for pump users. But perhaps it's advice, an answer to a question, some kind of momentary thing. And it blocks and hinders people with medical education who understand pump insulin therapy well. Not as much as one would like, that is, since it is more a complex device, there are more ways to do something wrong. A patient using a pump has more chances to make a mistake somewhere. They all need to be taken into account. And I, as a doctor who is not particularly immersed in the issues of pump insulin therapy, might not recommend a pump to a person, just realizing that he will have no one to ask for help, and I won't be able to help him much either. This is also a barrier, as of today. Again, it's getting better. More and more endocrinologists and non-endocrinologists are delving into pump insulin therapy. More and more patients are ready to manage on their own rather than seeking answers from endocrinologists. But nevertheless, I would place this in third place.
But fighting diabetes is not just about gadgets, it's also about knowledge and access to information. It's about ensuring that a person is not left alone with their diagnosis so that they knew you are not alone and you can live with it. In many countries, there are diabetes schools that teach patients how to manage high blood sugar levels and calculate dosages, how to conduct oneself in daily life. More and more doctors are being trained according to modern international protocols. More and more new companies, such as Sugar Pulse, are being established to bridge the gap between patients and support, especially in those moments when there is no doctor nearby. At the state level, there are attempts to curb the growth of type 2 diabetes through the promotion of a healthy lifestyle, sugar taxes, and school meal reforms. Projects to combat obesity, but these are not quick measures, yet they are effective. And resistance is also about individual stories, about parents who wake up every night to check their child's sugar levels, about teenagers who learn to inject insulin at a party and are not embarrassed by their sensors, about adults who at 40 reassess their lives to watch their children grow, about those who don't give up. As an old song goes, what if we get lucky and the visas remain? And it seems that somewhere on the horizon, a glimmer of hope is indeed flickering. The 25th year began with sensational publications about the successful transplantation of artificially grown beta cells. Some journalists rushed to headline that type 1 diabetes has been defeated without understanding the details. Transplantation of beta cells is possible, but humanity has not yet found a solution to the main problem: how to stop the autoimmune reaction, the destruction of these cells by the body's own immune system. The most advanced research in this field is being conducted by the American company Cearnova, with their technology for transplanting beta cells in a special gel called Cell Patch. More than 300 subjects with type 1 diabetes have already been involved, have been living for more than 7 years without the need to inject insulin.
Oleg, nice to meet you. The technology is currently in clinical trial. The trial is called Phase 1 and Phase 2. Primarily, we seek safety and tolerance. We also measure efficiency. At the moment, the trial consists of 3 codes. It is an adaptive design. Code A is complete. In code A, we surgically implant what you can see. In my hand, it's called a packet. It is located under the patient's skin, but above the abdominal muscles. In about 6 weeks, it becomes highly inflamed. The skin grows in it, through it, and around it. The surgeon enters the code, and you see that there are small handles coming out of these codes, and the patient, at the moment we are using coded tiles. These are coded tiles that produce insulin, somatostatin, and glucagon. After a while, the patient begins to respond. In code A, we observed that 6 out of 6 patients became independent from insulin use. In code B, we are considering the optimization of the immunosuppression regimen. Because when you insert tiles that were not originally created in your own body into the code tile, your immune system may reject them. Therefore, we need to suppress the immune system so that the shingles can survive, but also to a level where the immune system can still respond to infections and other invading viruses and bacteria. So this review is almost complete, and we will begin examining the confirmed study of Code C later this year on Saturday. This review will connect the studies of Code A and Code B. Our goal here, once again, is to demonstrate independence from insulin use and ultimately provide a functional lecture for people with diabetes. Type 1, I also have type 1 diabetes, so I live and work with it. Next year, we will have a collaboration with a company founded in Germany, Evotech, and they are developing a code cell from codes. They differentiate codes to become code codes. Next year, we want to enter the clinic with coded codes and promote the product in the industry. That's exactly what we're trying to do. I am diabetes. I use an insulin cell. I know you have a daughter with a code. I don't know how she treats herself, but I can give her insulin. And when my blood circulation increases, I give her insulin from my cell. However, when my circulation decreases, I can't stop it except by reducing the amount of insulin or eating glucose. Because for a person who is not diabetic, the normal function of the pancreas involves 3 hormones: insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. Insulin regulates high glucose levels. Glucagon prevents low glucose levels. Somatostatin regulates both of these hormones. But currently, type 1 diabetics cannot do this. However, from the data we have obtained, we know that cellular humans in the package, and we demonstrated this in the packages that were in the package for more than 5 years, they produce insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. So our ultimate goal is to create something we call a biohybrid organ, which functions like a healthy pancreas. Therefore, we are likely collaborating with a large company for some time, which will be responsible for the commercialization of the product. We are a research and development organization. We don't have a commercial infrastructure or plans to build one. So this will happen, and then improving package production will be quite simple. Our partner, Evotech, will enhance the production of cellular humans made from cells. That's what they do in business. So this is how we will address it in the future.
Diabetes is not a sentence, it's a journey. Difficult, uneven, but quite passable. And on this challenging path, true heroes are sometimes encountered. Elena is an ordinary Moscow girl who grew up, fell in love, and made life plans just like millions of her peers. But Elena had to take an extremely unusual path.
And I learned about my diabetes diagnosis at the age of 7. But Yes, at 7 years old. Let me remember exactly now. On January 2nd, I was brought to the Children's Hospital Morozovskaya with a sugar coma. And on January 9th, I turned 8 years old. That's how I found out. But I was feeling very unwell for a long time, and my mom took me to the hospital. She was getting ready for work in the morning, but by January 2nd, she realized it was pointless and I wasn't feeling any better because they told her there that it would get easier, that it's just a phase, the child is overworked. They found some reasons there. And in the end, a sugar coma, and that's it. As a child, I took it more easily. I was like, well, I'll live with it. That's all. Yeah. As a child, I took it normally. I just realized that I would live with it. I don't know. I didn't have a choice, it seems to me. I saw how the newcomers, even after I got sick, you would end up in the hospital once a year with all those nuances like hormonal changes, very poor sugar levels there, difficult, especially around the period that probably starts at age 11. It's difficult to control sugar levels. Plus, you suddenly start considering yourself the smartest, naturally smarter than the doctors. And that's probably the period. I was admitted to the hospital due to some issues. This significantly affected my overall health. I was discharged at the age of 7, and there was no diabetes education available. We navigated by touch with my mom, and it was mostly me, rather than my mom. She was working. I took care of myself. One day, my mom decided that I fell asleep and she decided to give me a shot of long-acting insulin for the night. I woke up and she got scolded for it, like, don't, I can do it myself. Well, because it hurts. Well, it's severe type diabetes, a severe course. I don't know how to explain it, by no means, and it's partly my fault too. Just during a difficult transitional period, which resulted in other consequences, and they followed one after another. At such a moment that by the age of 30, it all started at 25. And for 5 more years, well, my tests made it clear that sooner or later I would need an organ transplant, a kidney transplant. And at 30, the test said, that's it. I had the transplant at 31 already. But there was a choice. Transplant one kidney or a kidney with a pancreas. And if they transplant you with a pancreas, like with diabetes, no one removes this diagnosis from you, but you no longer inject insulin. You just live like a normal person. Well, like usual, like a person with transplanted organs, you still take immunosuppressants. There are other consequences. Diabetes. Many people have asked me if it's possible to just transplant without placing the kidneys. You really shouldn't do that. Firstly, no one will transplant it, and secondly, if you transplant a pancreas, the immunosuppression will damage your own kidneys. The kidney they transplanted into me won't work for my entire life. I'll have to undergo another transplant. There are also many side effects from immunosuppression, you know, like I have a 50% higher risk of developing cancer. Right now the sky is overcast and I'm standing under SPF protected from the sun. Always, all year round, no matter what happens. If I go outside during the day, I'm always under it. And there are many limitations here, to be honest. They just exist, but it's different. There was no choice. There are people who choose to stay on dialysis. But for me, there was no such choice. I think my surgery lasted 9 hours. I'm not sure. I was asleep. They called around 9 in the evening. And this Shumakov Center is a half-hour drive from me. My boyfriend drove me there. It was right before the COVID era. It was the year 2020, just before COVID. It was in China, but not yet in Russia. They let him into the ward with me. He left from there somewhere 4:30 a.m. and I ended up sleeping in the hallway. My organs haven't been delivered yet. They were, well, the doctor went to retrieve them. At 6 a.m. I was woken up. They said I needed to be presented to the family, so I should go change. I wrote to all my girlfriends and friends there. I called my mom and texted my boyfriend. Well, you know, the usual, I texted my brother. Everything's fine, I'm on my way. And I probably came to my senses by evening. It was very painful. Well, I spent less than a day in intensive care there. They knocked us out there. Of course, it took me 3 hours to get up. They took my tests. I don't know how many tubes sticking out of me, something there, bags of blood. These are from the stomach. Well, you know, the whole set. And then, yes, right there, yes. And then I was transferred to intensive care. My mom arrived. Mom is amazing, Mom is incredible, she's so lively, it's okay, we'll manage. Just like that. I know they were very worried. They called the hospital, they didn't know who to contact. And there was no information about me at the information desk because on the internet, and they didn't tell me how long the operation would take. They were like, you have to go, that's it. But on the internet, it says that with the recovery room, the operation lasts 7 hours. And it didn't last 7 hours. Naturally, there was panic all around. It lasted 9. Eventually, my mom managed to reach the doctor who had a contact, Denis Vasilievich Kukovyakin. And he said, we've done everything. Everything else depends on how she progresses, well, like her body. And when they transferred me, my mom arrived. They told me I had to stay for a day. She stayed. The next day she left. It was very painful. On the 5th day, I said, well, she came every day because I wasn't managing very well on my own there. I told the guy, my brother, and my father not to come. And they are men. They are weak. It would have been better for them not to see this, of course. Throughout the year, you just stop being so afraid. I remember writing to my doctor, you are assigned a doctor who monitors you the entire time and accompanies you for tests. To take any medication, you write to her. I remember at some point, Ekaterina Tetyanovna stopped responding. Well, I understand her. Because I was panicking about everything. Well, I mean, I'm not the worst option. It can be worse. Like those parents whose children have had transplants. That's understandable. That's really scary. Me too. And after a year, it became easier in this regard. Morally, things have gotten worse. Because you're like this, I've recovered. Inside me are the organs of a dead person. And you're doing nothing with your life. Well, like, I've been thinking about stand-up for a long time. When I was on dialysis, the women's stand-up show on TNT was still at the level of technical rehearsals. It hadn't aired yet, but I attended it regularly. Just like during a technical break, just to have something to do between dialysis sessions to distract myself. Because there were so many hospital visits, I was just collecting tests to get in line. Well, there were a lot of these medical procedures. And there was a women's stand-up show, and back then I already thought, damn, I can do it too. And so, when after a year, that feeling emerged that you are doing nothing, a sense of guilt about all of this, that I can live my whole life like a plant, a more solid endeavor had already emerged. I had a fight with my boyfriend and went on stage for the first time. That's just how it happened. Stand-up is a bit like therapy. You laugh at your problem, slightly diminishing its importance. And maybe it might offend someone. But for me, it just makes everything easier. That's all. Well, in stand-up comedy, there are a lot of interesting people, so to speak. There's a very famous guy, Valera Kirokosyan, who has an artificial heart. Iron, in the literal sense. He had such an operation in Krasnodar. He is the only one in Russia, and he is a stand-up comedian. There are many people with cerebral palsy in wheelchairs who cannot walk. It's fine. If you can joke about it, it makes you invincible. I have 2 main topics: organ transplants and members. Everything is standard, but I can't talk for 20 minutes about organ transplants. The audience will get tired, and I'm here to make them laugh. They're getting too serious. I can't tell. I have a lot of segments there about disability, about everything. Everything is joked about. Everything is fine, but it's too long. Naturally, I also have all the simple stuff there. About relationships, about anything at all, about communication, about girls. However, our stand-up audience isn't as mature as in America. Over there, they often joke less and philosophize more, and the audience forgives them for it. Here, people come to laugh. Many people have this bar theme. It's not being taken into any project anymore. It's about how I'm over 30 and have these kinds of problems. It's been joked about from all sides. This won't go into any project, but in the bar, always, most often, the majority of the bar is girls. And the girls want to laugh about it, and many talk about it because it's relatable. Jokes about transportation are important both for me and for the audience. How do I explain it? First and foremost, well, it's a very selfish situation. First and foremost, I'm helping myself. But if it helps someone else, that's amazing. I had a joke. I posted it in Reels, in those short videos, about how I bought seats for people with disabilities at the Sapson station. They are available and they are cheaper. I just have a blog there about how it's advantageous to be disabled. Well, in fact, everything is well documented there. I really like this blog myself. It's submitted, everything is fine. But there's also a joke about how you usually can't tell just by looking at me when I was buying tickets. The cashier asked me a question there, and I didn't understand why she asked it. At first, it didn't register with me. Then she started asking me slowly, loudly, and syllable by syllable, well, you know, all that. But she didn't understand how to communicate with me, because usually if nothing is visible, it means something else is hurting. And so, like, I turned around when I picked it up, and that's it. Thank you very much. I realized that people at the station were looking at me a bit. Well, it's strange. I said, it's the perfect time to pretend I have Tourette's syndrome. And that's all. And a girl wrote to me there saying she has Tourette's syndrome, and you're making fun of it. I said, damn, it's not about that at all. I said, it's just easier for me this way, not because I want to belittle anyone's experiences. It's, well, these are purely my feelings. I have a right to them.
So
I can be seen, I think, in many bars in Moscow. I don't know. Wherever there's stand-up, I go. There's no fixed schedule anymore. It's just that wherever there's stand-up, everything, I can be anywhere, I think. I believe we have 7 or 6 stand-up clubs in Moscow. I think I haven't read everything. There's so much. These are stand-up clubs. There are also other venues where performances are held several times a week as well. We have plenty of venues for performers. And here I am in some places. Sometimes I walk around the center and I think, oh, I performed here and here. I was looking at a selection of places to meet with friends there. Well, I'm like, I'm not going there, I've performed here, I'm not going there, I've performed here, I'm not going there, I've performed here. Because you have slightly different associations, they're work-related. You arrive, make some concessions, have a coffee, and leave. Sometimes you don't even have coffee. You give your presentation and head to another place. That's it. You just leave and move on.
hello, how's everything? Thank you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Lena. I'm 36, and I just had a whirlwind layover. I understand that whirlwind layover sounds like a tongue twister, but it was through Istanbul. No, they transplanted 2 organs into me. Don't scrutinize me. These aren't breasts. What they did was transplant pancreatic kidneys into me without removing the old organs, just added 2 new ones, simply expanding the abdomen, here and here.
Diabetes may seem inevitable, especially if there have already been such cases in your family, particularly if you've heard, it's genetics, there's nothing you can do about it. But that's not the case. Today, more than ever, we have the chance to prevent the disease, or at least delay it for years. For type 1 diabetes, despite its autoimmune nature, science has made a breakthrough. In 2022, the first drug in the world capable of delaying the onset of the disease, teplizumab, was approved in the USA. It does not cure diabetes, but it can buy up to 2 years of time and potentially more in the future. This is especially important for children from at-risk groups, siblings, children, and relatives of people with type 1 diabetes. They have a chance to avoid ending up in intensive care with ketoacidosis and instead face the illness consciously, prepared, with monitoring and support. This is why today, in several countries, screening of children for autoantibodies has begun, special markers that indicate that the immune system has started to target beta cells. The earlier it is detected, the more opportunities there are to intervene. Make diabetes screening an annual norm for your family. And what about type 2 diabetes? Here, the key word is lifestyle. Even geneticists studying DNA heredity admit, the presence of risk genes does not necessarily mean that a person will definitely get sick. If a person watches their weight, stays active, gets enough sleep, eats mindfully, and manages stress, the chances of encountering diabetes decrease significantly, even if their grandfather, grandmother, and both parents are on insulin. We don't know if we'll be able to completely defeat diabetes in the next decade, but we do know that the sooner we start taking action, the more lives we will save. And perhaps very soon, the word diabetes will no longer sound like a sentence, but will remain just a word from the past.
I want everyone on the planet to watch this film so that everyone is warned. But I also know that this film will mainly be watched by people who are already living with diabetes, parents of children newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, who are scared, lost, and in disbelief about what is happening. I understand you. And to each of you, I promise that together we will find a solution to the problem. But today, let's all watch Elena Grampina stand up once more and smile. Because as Lena says, if you can joke about it, you become invincible. Take care of yourself. Sweet dreams.